Coming out and joining us today. This is our 5th year of presenting an event series. Just very quickly, I know some of you have been to our events before and you're familiar with our origination story, but we also have some folks who are here with us for the first time. We started in response to an ugly time in Amherst. There was an unfortunate outcome from right around St. Patrick's Day that resulted in well, they call it the Barney blow-up. It was a big drink fest, and it was on the cover of the newspaper, and it was even made national news. And the images that we saw, they horrified us, and we felt immediately that it was not something that represented what it means to be Irish, despite the fact that they tied the name Blarney Blowout to it. We felt that it was not something that represented what it means to be a student in Amherst. It was something that we wanted to provide another choice, another example of what it means to be Irish in Amherst. And so we sat down and we planned it out, and we had some speakers, some wonderful speakers lined up. We began on a snowy Sunday in February. The Patriots were playing in the Super Bowl that day. And we had the Globe writer Kevin Cullen who came out and joined us and gave a really wonderful presentation that day. And that really was the kickstart that we needed. We followed up with 3 more events. We had a UMass student who told us about her family on Blasket Island, and with a local connection to that. And we've just kept the ball rolling for these now we're in our 5th year. And last year we started an event, a new event, an essay competition event. And we named it after Margaret Maher, who was a servant in the Emily Dickinson household for 30 years. And she represents more of what we think of when we think about the Irish in Amherst. Hardworking and maybe not always noticed, but contributing in a way that's lasting. And so we chose to honor her by naming our essay competition for her. And so we have last year's winner back to present for us. We're going to learn what one of these is. We have our finalists as well today, and with that, I'll turn it over to Edith.
Thank you, Sam. Fortune, first of all, welcome. I would like to put in a few words of Irish so that we're reminded that there is another language that also goes with this place that's called Ireland, and that the earlier immigrants actually came mostly from the Western Seaboard, where that language was spoken. So Fáilte is figure with Galéir an Sahanov, coming Anahosta, Behan Sa Liv, Comórtas Margaret Maher. For the Comórtas is the competition, the finalist of the Margaret Maher competition. I would add that Margaret Maher's first language was Irish. She came from the Gaeltacht area, which in Tipperary at the time. And some scholars attribute Emily Dickinson's Hiberno English twist in some of her poems to being around Margaret in the kitchen when they baked scones and the like. And that reminds me to mention we will have delicious scones after the presentation. So we'll hold on for those. We are very pleased to have Monica Garrigiano and her dad Michael with us here today. Monica was our winner last year. UMass graduate, now working in tax. So if you have any tax questions, you can get her at the tea and scones afterwards. Our other finalist, Samantha Haddad, who had presented on the repeal of the 8th Amendment, which took place in Ireland in May, was to be with us today, but she's ill. So she'll come another time, but she was actually prepared to hold PowerPoint for us, but another day. And Heather Brennan, who is our other finalist from Amherst College, is actually playing a hockey match away from the college today. So she is willing to come at another time too, to talk about her period, she's planning to study abroad in Ireland for a year at Trinity College in Dublin. So we're trying to weave in the connections with the place that is Ireland, ideas about Ireland, our community here, and we are at a heart of hearts open and committed to inclusion, and that's our message. I want to acknowledge our core team, Tim, Sam, Annie Rogers, who's not here with us today, and Jonathan and Amanda, who are our Irish language teachers, both Americans, both fluent Irish speakers, and you can get the information on their online course if you'd like to learn Irish. It's at the table. Okay, enough of my gabbing along. The last acknowledgement is to our sponsors. We get some sponsorship from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Ireland's Department of Foreign Affairs, to help us with the advertising. And that to us is important because it says we're doing something that they think is important also. And that gives us a bit of confidence in the community of Amherst to say it's not all about Blarney Blowout, it's not all about green t-shirts and swigging 20 pints. Ireland and those who are interested in Ireland can actually come together in different ways. We also don't think we have the way, so we're always open to ideas. So let me just say that too. Our presentations by the finalists. Last year we had 3 finalists, this year we have 4. The topic, Ireland, what interests me and why. We've asked each of the finalists to present their work. We'll then have a brief questions and answer session. We'll ask the finalists to come up and sit here in the chairs if you would. And we'll have a brief questions and answers. After that session then, Monica, you'll be on, will present about her trip to Ireland. The prize is a trip to Ireland, and Monica went last year and is going to present on that. And after Monica's presentation, then we'll have the award ceremony. Is that okay? So a very clear outline. We're so pleased and proud to be here with you all and delighted to have so many submissions. Our judges were very impressed, and I'm going to call on Ken Johnston to kickstart us. Ken, please come up, introduce yourself, and then please present your views.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Ken Johnston, and I'm delighted to be here and to be considered a finalist today for the Irish Association Margaret Maher Award. I've been working through a bit of a cold the last week, so please forgive me if my throat chokes up. Ireland, what interests me and why? In March 1965, 600 marchers formed outside the Brown Chapel AME Church in Selma, Alabama. They were dressed in everyday street clothes and took great risks to attempt to march to the state capital of Montgomery, 54 miles away, to demand the right to vote. As the peaceful protesters turned east out of Selma on US Route 80 to cross over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by state and local lawmen who attacked them with billy clubs and tear gas and drove them all the way back to the AME Church, while also attacking black residents in the surrounding neighborhood. This incident, captured on camera by television news reporters, was seen by people around the world on TV in a day that became known as Bloody Sunday. Across the world in Northern Ireland, people took notice of the civil rights movement in the United States and the similarities of grievances. Groups began forming with names like Campaign for Social Justice, the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association, the Derry Housing Action Committee, the People's Democracy, the Derry Citizens Action Committee, among others. Protest strategies, slogans, and songs popularized in the American South were adopted, and similar calls for social justice rang out across Northern Ireland. 7 years later, on Sunday, 30 January 1972, during a parade organized by the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association in Derry, British troops opened fire on a splinter group of peaceful protest marchers, injuring Damien Donaghy and John Johnston. Minutes later, a second group of British troops opened fire on marchers in the Rossville Street area, where a meeting was being held at the Free Derry corner. In all, 13 people died that day, with many more injured from gunshots, in a day that is also remembered as Bloody Sunday in Ireland. Today, we know the marchers led by the Reverend Martin Luther King were ultimately successful in their bid to reach the Alabama state capitol and to get President Lyndon Johnson to sign the Voting Rights Act of 1965 as a course of redress for past grievances. And in Northern Ireland, the non-violent civil rights movement would ultimately lose out to more militant voices calling for an armed struggle that would not end the Troubles until the signing of the Good Friday Agreement of 1998, some 30 years later, restoring self-government to Northern Ireland. What interests me most about Ireland today is how reconciliation worked to achieve freedom and peace since the Good Friday Agreement, and how communities have embraced King's American legacy of civil rights, truth, justice, forgiveness, and repentance across Ireland. Late last year, I learned the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, Tennessee was planning remembrance ceremonies to mark the 50th anniversary of Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination. I recognized the importance of this moment, and I thought about how could I contribute to this great event. I asked myself, what could I do to honor the legacy of Dr. King's ideas? What commitment of myself could I offer the civil rights movement today? How could I pay homage to our ancestors who sacrificed so much for our freedom? That's when the idea of Walk to Freedom was born. I realized if I was going to offer a symbolic gesture to Dr. King and to help move the civil rights movement ahead by 1 yard and give thanks to the original freedom seekers, then I was going to walk to demonstrate my commitment. My 400-mile walk from Selma to Montgomery to Birmingham and onward to Memphis symbolically connected the cities where Dr. King either worked, pastored, or led civil rights marches. I began the walk on February 25th and concluded in Memphis on March 31st, 2018. One question I was frequently asked was, after this walk, what's next? I often smiled and said, I want to walk across Ireland. People would look at me quizzically and ask, why Ireland? Because of the profound effect the U.S. civil rights movement had there. They called themselves the Negroes of Northern Ireland, and they routinely sang, "We Shall Overcome," at their marches, which most people know as the anthem of the civil rights movement in the United States, said Maurice Hobson, a historian and African American studies professor, quoted in an NBC article titled "Dr. King's Impact on the Fight for Civil Rights in Northern Ireland" by Chandra Thomas Whitfield. While Dr. King never visited Ireland, his ideas and legacy had political impact on a generation of people in Northern Ireland. What interests me in Ireland is how it has endeavored to strive and succeed at reconciliation where the U.S. has not. Is the achievement of reconciliation a true goal for Ireland? Are there different understandings and uses of the word reconciliation across communities of Ireland? Does the term bring up hard feelings? If selected as the 2008 Margaret Maher Award recipient, my desire is to fly to Ireland, to walk across segments of the aisle, following the same routes taken by the People's Democracy and other civil rights marchers 50 years ago today. My goal is to meet and listen to some of the Sindwin still living who participated in the struggle for freedom in Northern Ireland in the 1960s and 70s. I learned on my recent walk across the Deep South that the current generation of youth has a vague, fragmented memory of past struggles for freedom. It's my hope that by visiting Ireland, I can serve as a cultural ambassador, sharing current pictures and stories describing what it's like to walk across two historic trails of freedom: the People's Democracy Trail from Belfast to Derry, and the Selma to Montgomery Historic National Trail, linked by similar stories of social justice. Additionally, I also look forward to discovering the different regions of the country to absorb its myths, legends, and stories of its magnificent culture.
Frederick Douglass. There's a brilliant new collection by historian Christine Keneally of his speeches and his time in Ireland in the 1847 period. Christine is in the Famine Museum in Quinnipiac, down towards Hartford, Connecticut. It's a double volume piece, so you get it in the library if you wanted to follow up on that. Thank you very much. We did limit our contestants to 1,000 words for the submission, but we did allow a little longer if you needed it in terms of the presentation today. So it is my pleasure to welcome a man with connections to Ireland's Garda Síochána, or the police, Conor McMahon. Welcome, Conor.
Conor McMahon, I'm honored to be here today. In the age of Black Lives Matter in America, where innocent, unarmed African Americans are gunned down by a weaponized police force, I can't help but think of my great-grandfather. W.R.E. Murphy, former Deputy Commissioner of Ireland's police force, the Garda Síochána. The Garda, as they are known in Ireland, are peacemakers in the community. The literal translation of Garda Síochána means the guardians of the peace. Growing up, I remember being transfixed by stories my father told me. The story that held my rapt attention most of all, I'd say, was about the guardians of the peace, or the Garda as they were known locally. My great-grandfather, my father's maternal grandfather, W.R.E. Murphy, held a direct role in establishing as the first Irish-born commissioner of the Dublin Metropolitan Police in 1922. In 1925, he became the deputy commissioner of the Irish police force when the Dublin Metropolitan Police merged with the Garda. In 1922, the Irish Free State was established after 6 years of warfare with the British rulers. The decision to make the Garda be an unarmed police force in 1922 was amazing, especially after 6 years of violence. The fact that in the following 6 years, it was remarkable that they would remain unarmed during the course of the Civil War. He had a direct role in this policy as Deputy Commissioner from 1922 to 1955. He was appointed to the position by Michael Collins. He believed that the Irish police force, number one, had to have the support of the community to be effective. In order to do that, they could not be seen as a threat to the community. Everything they did and the actions taken were driven primarily to get the support of the community. That is, the Garda worked in conjunction with the community to help keep the peace. Born in Wexford in 1890, his parents died before he was 6. He gained his Master of Art degree in Queen's University, Belfast, by the time he was 18. He met his wife, Mary Agnes Fortune, when they were teenagers. They both had a great love for music and the arts. He became a school inspector in Donegal in the northwest of Ireland. He and 112,000 young Irish joined the British Army in the First World War to fight the Germans, based on the promise that Britain would give Ireland home rule. Britain reneged on this, and the Irish Rebellion of 1916 happened. My great-grandfather was made a brigadier general based on his strategic planning for battles. As the 112,000 soldiers came back from World War I, they were treated as traitors by the Irish for helping the British. Ireland had totally changed while they were off at war in Europe. Eventually, this settled down. My great-grandfather, like any soldier who had survived the horrors of war, understood the importance of establishing peace and trust. Those were the underlying principles of the Garda. Also known as the People's Police, the Garda were designed to be very different from the British police force in the last 700 years. The Garda was seen most importantly as part of the community and to all of the homeowners and businesses. They worked together to help those in need and keep the community safe. To build team spirit within the new police force, WRE established Garda athletic teams throughout the community. Eventually, some of the best boxers and athletes represented Ireland in the Olympics. W.R.E. Murphy became head of the Irish Olympic delegation. He found himself in Berlin in the 1936 Olympics in front of Hitler. He was disgusted with the way Hitler had treated Jesse Owens. Ireland had been treated that way by the British for 700 years, so it's not surprising that he turned his back on Hitler at the end of the Olympics. It's hard to imagine the American police force disarming when they are surrounded by 300 million guns. However, if I'm being honest, I see the Irish police force as a more humane and just police force, and also a model for perhaps other nations to follow.
Thank you very much, Conor. Next we have Nora Turriago. Nora.
Hello everyone. I just want to say thank you to the Amherst Irish Association for hosting this event and having us here today. I feel very welcome. My claim to Irish heritage used to be non-existent. As someone who describes herself as Colombian Italian, it was only in high school that I found out I had a great-grandfather from my mother's side who was half Irish. At this point, what did it matter? It certainly wasn't enough to qualify to wear one of those "Kiss Me, I'm Irish" shirts. And anyways, when people meet me and they see a racially ambiguous brown person, the first thing they think isn't, "Oh, she's Irish, all right." Yet, despite any strong ancestral connection, I have always been interested in Ireland. This interest, I believe, can be traced back to a certain 2000 VHS tape called Riverdance. When I was in elementary school, I absolutely loved Riverdance. And what wasn't there to love? A captivating thrill of music, colorful outfits, and then, of course, the sound of tap shoes like hard rain, the entire cast flooding on stage, tapping their feet in unison. The tape left such an impression on me that I would pull out a saved, deconstructed cardboard box and stand on it, mimicking the tapping I saw on screen. I even rented another VHS tape, this one promising to teach me some Irish step. As I grew up, I moved on from movies to take some Irish step dancing in a high school dance class, and I even saw Riverdance perform in concert. For me, Irish step dancing proved the entrance point into learning more about Irish history and culture. In 5th grade, I was first introduced to Irish history through a unit on the potato famine. We researched information, presented a skit, and even sang a song. I remember reading a historical fiction first-hand account of the famine through the eyes of a young girl named Nora. I also recall field trips to Lowell, where I learned about the young women who left their homes in Ireland to work in the mills. I learned about Irish need not apply and the difficult conditions for recently arrived Irish immigrants. It wasn't until I was older, as a history major at Smith College, that I realized how much more history there was beyond the potato famine. I read up on the Easter Rising and the IRA. I read historical fiction novels like Edna O'Brien. I learned that the Irish, like the Italians, were once not considered white. I learned about the shifting politics of immigration and citizenship, and who exactly qualified to be an American citizen. My Italian great-grandparents crossed the Atlantic too, going through Ellis Island and struggling to work, to raise a family, and to navigate American culture while still retaining their Italian heritage. My grandfather ended up changing his name to the shortened, easier to pronounce Anglo version because of the difficulty of finding work when your name is Giuseppe Rosito. These experiences are not limited to the past. In 1981, my father left Colombia for New York City, where he dealt with more than his fair share of prejudice and challenges. Fast forward to today, where racial discrimination fuels the decision of who gets to come to America. Immigration politics and policies did not start or end with the Irish. However, for me, learning about the potato famine and the mass migration from Ireland to America allowed me to reflect on my own personal history. This summer, I left Spain, where I had been teaching English for 2 years, to return home to Amherst. My flight required a layover to Dublin, and once we were up in the air, flying to Boston, I couldn't help but think of the Irish, who made this exact same trip, although under much different conditions, on a boat, for one thing, and with a 40-day trajectory involving sickness, discomfort, and panic, only to arrive in a new country where nothing was guaranteed. My inner historian, my Riverdance enthused self, and my time living in a foreign country were all reasons that explained why I was now looking outside the airplane window at the gray skies and green below, trying to imagine what that journey must have been like for the millions who left Ireland so long ago. It turns out While I will always be passionate about the joys of river dance, I am most interested in the history of immigration from Ireland to America. The history of immigration is one of hardship and sacrifice, of struggle and triumph. It is the story of your parents and grandparents and your ancestors that everyone, not just the Irish, but the Colombian Italians too, can claim and identify with. It is the story of your past and present. It is the story of how you got here.
Thank you, Nora. And might I also mention that Ireland is now a place that people arrive to since the early 2000s. So the complications and the hardships of having come in the past here are now being experienced by other people of other ethnicities on the island of Ireland. So, and maybe a next project. Denise, Barberet, Barberet? Either one. We take Barberet, welcome, and please round of applause for Denise.
I'm very pleased to be here, but I have to admit, I am a true New Englander, and so I don't get overly excited about a lot of things. So, and this is an interesting follow-up because I actually lead a double life. Many people here know me as English speaking, and English is my first language. But in my other life, I actually work as a medical interpreter with Hispanic immigrants, many of them undocumented. So, and occasionally I do remind them that I too am descended from immigrants. So this that I'm going to read right now is a little bit about my story, my history of immigration. This is a story of loss, and of a lost story, and actually a couple of stories when I think about it. She was born in 1864 or 1865, likely in County Kerry, Ireland. She came to America in 1881. In 1886, she married a Connecticut saloon keeper. I know that's a bit of a cliche, but anyway. Her first child was born and died the following year. She gave birth to 7 more children. Between 1896 and 1899, 4 of those children would die, including what must have been last-born twin girls. When she died in 1902, at age 37, only 3 children survived her. Her name was Annie Parsons. She was born Annie Donaghy, and she was my great-grandmother, and this is all I know of her. Annie's husband, my great-grandfather, Hubert Parsons, the saloon keeper, was now a widower with 3 young children. He soon married an older spinster, and interestingly enough, spinster was actually listed as an occupation. And several of the immigrants who came over in the forms, I saw it there. He soon married an older spinster named Catherine Neary, who herself headed a household of younger siblings. She had been born in Connecticut of Irish immigrant parents. Catherine's relationship with her new family must have been good, because census records show that after her death, one of Catherine's brothers lived as a boarder with her stepdaughter Evangeline's own young family. But Annie Parsons' legacy of loss continued for this oldest daughter, Evangeline, who was my grandmother. My grandmother lost her own mother when she was 12 in 1902. Her only surviving sister, Grace, married and moved to Massachusetts in 1917. Her stepmother, Catherine, died in 1918. Her only surviving brother, Frederick, died in 1920 when he left no children. And in 1924, her father, Hubert, died. Then, in 1928, after only 11 years of marriage, her husband, Charles, who was my grandfather, died of pneumonia, leaving her a widow with 5 small children. The oldest child was 12, the youngest was 1. It was the year before the Great Depression. My grandmother never remarried. She had not grown up poor. Her father owned his own business and his own home, and the 1900 census shows that the household included an Irish servant woman. My grandfather Charles had a good factory job, but after 1928, my grandmother's family was poor. My grandfather's family, who were immigrants from France that came over in 1890, must have given them a great deal of help, and I believe this because my father's relationship with his elderly aunts continued well into the 1960s. I remember visiting their houses as a young child, They were very elderly ladies with mysterious names and very mysterious ailments. And from census records, I actually learned that my grandmother's sister Grace had returned from Massachusetts for a time and lived very nearby my grandmother, so I'm certain that she must have helped her as well. Whatever the mix of genetics, improved hygiene, and luck, both surviving daughters of Annie Parsons saw all their children grow to adulthood and to go on to lead long, productive lives. One daughter in each family remained childless, and each widowed mother lived with this daughter near the end of her life. My grandmother died when she was 77, and her sister Grace died at 85. Annie Parsons, who was my great-grandmother, who never saw any of her own children reach adulthood, now has 5 generations of descendants, and I'm part of that. My grandmother lived with us when I was small. We were very close. I'm sure that my love of cats comes directly from my grandmother. It was only later that I learned of the tensions between her and my mother, in part because my parents had married in the Methodist Church. So I'm the result of a mixed marriage. The story goes that after the marriage, the local Catholic priest, presumably at my grandmother's request, visited our house after the marriage to ask my father if he was sure that this was what he wanted to do. My grandmother was a devout Catholic, as I assume her grandmother was before her mother was before her. Their entire family is buried in the local Catholic cemetery. And therein lies a mystery. Hubert Parsons, my great-grandfather, was descended from a long line of Puritans and Congregationalists, including one of the founding families of Northampton, Cornet Joseph Parsons and Mary Bliss Parsons, who incidentally was tried as a witch at least twice. I'm sure my grandmother would have been absolutely horrified if she had known that.
The cats.
Sorry?
The cats.
The cats, the black cats. To my knowledge, Hubert Parsons was the only Catholic in that family. Did he convert for love of Annie Donahue? The genealogical materials now available on the internet have helped me put together a much more complete picture of where I come from. Several family lines have been traced back to the 1600s, not by me, but by other people, both in New England and in France. Yet my one known Irish connection, my great-grandmother, remains a virtual mystery. She appears only in the 1900 census. She was kind of, when she came, she was after the 1800 census. When she died, it was right after the 1900 census, so she's missing in quite a few of the decennial censuses. Immigration records list, unbelievably, just 2 Annie Donahues, but the bare bones information on them, age, spinster, or servant, does not match the information that I have. Where was Annie Donahue born? Why did she leave Ireland? Did she come alone? How did she come to Connecticut? And what did she do before her marriage? This part of her story remains unknown despite all the research that I've done. Yet some things that seem lost may not be. My grandmother must have talked to me about her sister Grace, but I don't remember any mention of Grace after my grandmother died, and eventually I simply forgot about her. I was 8 when my grandmother died. But recently I suddenly thought of Grace, but all that I could remember was that she had a daughter named Pauline and that she lived somewhere in Massachusetts, either Springfield or Quincy. So what I did was I went to Ancestry. On one census record, I got a month of birth and a year of birth. And I went to the Social Security Death Index. I typed in Grace, March 1895 in Massachusetts. And I hoped that seeing the last name would ring a bell. Of course, I got hundreds of records. And I went through them one by one by one. A name rang a bell. It wasn't the right name, but it was very close. And further research confirmed that I indeed found my lost great aunt. So sadly, her daughter Pauline had died just 2 years before I began my search, but I have been able to locate the names of other descendants who may actually still have information about my great-grandmother. Knowing the answers to Annie Donahue's early life will not change who I am. It will not change the short life that she lived on American soil. But I think of what she must have lost when she left her family and her country, very similar to the people I work with, to come here alone to an unknown future. I think, too, of how that future began to come alive for her with the promise of children, only to have it darken as one by one they sickened and died. Most didn't live past 5 years old. Many died when they were infants. And I think of how she herself died so young, at 37, perhaps lost in sorrow at having lost so much. For her sake, I would like to find that part of her story that is lost to me, for it is her beginning, and in a way, it is also mine.
Contributions. At this point in our proceedings, I'd just like to ask each of you to bring your chair here to the front and ask if there's any questions from anyone in the audience for our four finalists in relation to their topics. It doesn't have to be a terribly complicated question. Might be how you pronounce Barberet or Barberet. I mean, there we go.
Just very quickly, what do each of the contestants do now? You are a medical records person, you said?
Medical interpreter.
Interpreter, okay. Just out of curiosity, what is their current profession, or what do you do?
Well, what do I do?
Yeah, I mean, the contestants, the four contestants.
Oh,
What do you
oh,
do?
okay. Yeah, I work as a medical interpreter, which basically means that I work in two languages. I go with patients who don't speak English well, and when they're seeing a doctor or any sort of medical provider, what they say in Spanish, I put in English for the provider, and then what the provider says in English, I put in Spanish for the patient.
And I work as an ESL paraprofessional in Orange.
English is a second language, right?
So also,
Interesting.
I'm a UMass Amherst student at the University Without Walls as a writing and literary skills major, and I'm delivering pizzas on the side.
Pizzas.
I've worked in career services for 20 years, presently working at the American International College in the Graduate Admissions Office.
All right. Any questions?
Yeah, question for Ken. When you traveled in the South, were you just walking alone, just covering that, and just on your own out there on the road?
Yes,
Yeah.
I walked all 400 miles. It was a unique solo walking journey that was approved by the National Civil Rights Museum. They were looking for community partners, and so I submitted a proposal last November. They told me at the end of December, and I had about 6 weeks to pull it all together to fundraise and organize the trip to the South and making connections with community groups and churches down there.
And you had your lodging was all prearranged, or were you winging it?
No. No, I carried a tent with me, and I tented out about 2-3 nights a week. The other 4 nights a week, people would take me into their homes, or churches would take me in, and so I was very fortunate that way that I didn't have to sleep out every night.
Did you happen to visit 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham?
I did. That was one of the key stops,
Yeah.
and I was interviewed by 3 television stations when I arrived in Birmingham about my walk because it was so unusual. Very touching. It's very moving. It's moving places.
Yeah, it is.
Any other questions?
Well, I've already asked one, but Mr. Johnston was the only one who said specifically what he would do when he went, if he were to win, what he would do when he went to Ireland. What about the other 3 contestants?
Oh, great question. Conor, I was wondering.
Well, I hope to go to the Garden Museum for sure and do some research, and also see my grandmother, who is WRE's daughter, and interview her rather. And she should have a lot of information as well.
Is the museum at Temple Moor where the college is, or?
It's probably Dublin Castle.
Oh, it's a Dublin Castle.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Okay, of course. Which is in Dublin, right?
Question.
Actually, I think you could put a photograph of it on materials. Sorry.
Question for Conor. When I hear the name Michael Collins, I have to ask more about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I'd have to research more about because, that's something I'm learning more about, so I'll get back to you when I come back.
But what do you have an appointment card or something, a document that said that it was Michael Collins, or how did that story come to you?
My dad was telling me about it,
Mhm.
yeah. And he lived with WRE,
Mhm.
so
Is that good news?
he lived with him, yeah. Well, WRE lived with family, so.
And Nora, what are your plans? You,
Well, I hope to do a lot of day trips. I want to go to Galloway. I want to see the cliffs of Maher.
more, yeah?
Yeah, and just taking as much as I can of the country and learning about its very history. Maybe see some river dance.
Yes, they're still on the go.
I have the least plans because I have the least amount of information. The scrap of information I've got from things I remember that people told me in my childhood was that my great-grandmother was from County Kerry. But when I looked up the name Donaghy, it said that they're mostly concentrated in County Derry, which is in Northern Ireland. So I'm not sure quite where to begin there. And, well, Donaghy is not a very common name, of course. So, it is.
Yes, I know.
Very sarcastic. So, I think what I would have to do to begin with is start actually in the US, in Johnston, Connecticut, which is where I believe she was married, where she had her children, and where she died, and go to the town hall there and see if they actually have any records that would give me any further information about her. All I've really been able to glean from census records are a couple of possible birth dates. As I said, 1864, 1865, and a lot of the times in the census, the information was self-reported. And with several records having to do with my family, information is varied. When she came, I only have one record indicating it was 1881. I don't know if that's correct or not. There was something that said she came from Southern Ireland, whatever that means, and there was something that said she spoke Irish. So I would have to start, I think, on American soil first to see if I could pin down exactly where it was that she came from. And my hope would be, if I can do that, to go to either County Derry or County Kerry to see what else I can find out about her. Yeah.
Okay, thank you all. A round of applause for Gary. So hold your question for the teens goals. This is my pleasure now to welcome Monica Caggiano to the Tim, do you need to help Monica set up her PowerPoint, and should I take over from you there? I don't know what to do there.
So first, I'd like to say thank you to the Amherst Irish Association, to Ida and to Tim. You guys have been so good to me and very helpful through the process of booking the trip and everything. And this event in general is an amazing thing, and it's still something I think about a lot, just because I've never liked to share my writing with anyone, and it can be very personal, but this topic is a great topic to talk about, and it's a great way to celebrate Irish culture, and that's something I'm very passionate about. So I went on my trip in May, and up there I put a picture of Croke Park because my essay last year, just to give you guys some background, was about Irish sport and how it relates to Irish culture. So the GAA is the Gaelic Athletic Association, and they oversee hurling and Gaelic football. And when I first went to Ireland after my freshman year of college, I went to visit some relatives with my family. I learned about the GAA, and I was a sport management major at UMass. So all the sports I had studied in my life had been about professional sport and about how to make money, basically. But Ireland is in a different way, and they celebrate amateurism, and it's about appreciating the sport, not about making money from the sport. So that was what I wrote my essay about. So I started in Dublin. I started and ended my trip in Dublin. Spent a week there with my roommate from college. And we went to Trinity College, did some of the touristy things, went to the Guinness Storehouse, all those good things. And we also did a tour of Croke Park that I'll tell you guys a little about at the end. They also have a GAA museum there. But the majority of our week we spent in Fenner with my family. The man on the left there is my mom's cousin Kevin. My mom's grandmother moved to the United States from Ireland. I'm not exactly sure when, but the church on the right there is where she was baptized. And above there, the picture there is fishing docks where my great-great-grandfather worked. Below is a pub. This is a very small village, so basically all they have is the church, the pub, and hurling. That's it. That's all they're about, really.
Waterford, right?
Yes, in Waterford. Yep, and then on the left, that's my my relative's farm. He owns a dairy farm. He has like 100 cows. I've got to see some cool things there. I got to drive a tractor. I got to see a cow give birth, which was crazy. Good experience. And lastly, the thing I tried to center my trip around was the sports, because it's something I'm very passionate about. So the GAA Museum tells you the entire history of hurling and how it came about, and it's very, very integrated with Ireland becoming its own thing and becoming free from England, basically. And on the outside of the museum, they have all of the emblems of each of the teams in all of Ireland. So that's Fenner, that's my uncle's club, or mom's cousin's club. And on the top right there, they reached the Waterford hurling final. They won the Waterford hurling final in 2015 for the juniors. And it was for the first time in the club's entire history since the late 1800s that they actually won something. So it was a huge deal. And it was and down on the left, I got to go to a small hurling match. And above that is Kevin receiving an award from the GAA for his work.
Which is the
the second.
Stunner?
Yep, Stunner. I'm Stunner. But one of the coolest things I got to do is really just talk to the people of Fenner. I think whoever gets to go to Ireland here, my biggest piece of advice to you would be to get out of the city and to try to meet just every common day, everyday person, because they'll have something to share with you that they won't in Dublin, because it's a lot of tourists. Cities can be very touristy, but the heart of Ireland, I think, is in the small villages and in the sports and the small teams that don't get as much recognition. But one of the best things that I found out was those guys up in the top right, some of them are 40 years old, and they were on this hurling final team. And they have regular jobs, and they go to school, they're students, they are landscapers, they work on the roads, and then at the end of their day they get to do something like this and win a final. It's something we don't have in America, and it's just a good example of appreciating amateur sport. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monica. That's fascinating. So what we thought we'd do is we'll break for tea and scones now and announce our winners after the tea and scones and do the presentations. So you have a chance to chat with one another and get to know one another a wee bit over. So let me just go and get the kettle. We certainly support from our community. We often have about 6 or 7 musicians, but there's an event this weekend in upstate New York, so they're all at that. And we had a wee bit of panic there before the tea and scones, because we thought our musicians weren't coming at all. And then I saw the face of Corey and I almost melted. And then Naomi behind him and I was almost gone completely. So thank you so much. They come every time and they perform for us to support our mission. So that's what this is about. Another round of applause.
First of all, before we announce the winner, if I could have Monica?
Thank you so much.
So, anyway, we just
Well, I get a photograph, Dee.
we just have this to say thank you for coming back and for sharing with us. We really appreciate the story, as we appreciated your essay last year. And congratulations again. And there you go.
Lovely. Just hold on, we get you turned around. Give me your hand in the bag, would you?
Oh.
Thank you. Unaccustomed as you are.
Thank you.
Okay, if I could ask all 4 finalists to come up again. And we're not going to do this whole 4th runner-up, 3rd runner-up, or anything like that. So I'm just going to present all of you. First of all, I would like to say, having read all of your essays, phenomenal. They were just phenomenal. We really appreciate it. Very, very difficult choices this year. And so we really appreciate all of you sharing deeply personal stories with us. So in any case, Conor. Applause for Conor. And the winner of the 2018 Maher Award is Ken Johnston.
If you want to organise a walk across Northern Ireland, you might have a few of us going with you.
But we don't want to be in a tent.
I agree. Thank you all. Please spread the word about the competition, about what we're about. And once again, from the bottom of our heart, thank you to all of you for such powerful submissions and for coming here today to present them. And Ken, we look forward to having you back to hear about your work.
Thank you.
Round of applause.
Even though we're done with this right now, we're not throwing you out at all.
Thank you, Denise.
So please stay, finish your tea and scones, have a chance to talk. We have music, so please stay and share. And to take the opportunity to congratulate our winners.
Yes, please do.